Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. I'm writing this for my online friend, Sue. She contacted me and asked if I would help her write the story of her erotic experience with one of her husband's colleagues 3 years ago, when she was 35. I've pieced together her story from her many emails. Although, after all our email correspondence, it is impossible to be sure, but I am completely convinced that her story is 100% true. I wrote the story from the first person as she handed it to me. I met my husband John at university, where I was getting a bachelor's degree in communications, and he was studying marketing. We both took psychology classes and started studying together on Friday evenings. John took his studies seriously, and I thought he was a little boring. He thought I was out of his league. John started inviting me to dinners and, eventually, to dances after studying at the university. It wasn't love at first sight, or second, or third, but he was persistent, and one Saturday he came to my parents' house, where I was staying for the weekend, with chocolates for my mother and tickets to a football match for my father. They found him charming. I asked him who he wanted to choose, my parents or me. I was 24 at the time. I lived far from home, and my father still turned on and off the porch light if he thought I'd been in the car with a guy for too long. The decisive moment for my father and me was that when John invited my parents to dinner, he picked them up in a Maserati. They didn't know that she had been lent to them. It was his boss's car. John and I dated for 4 years before we got married. I was 25 and he was 30. Neither of us had an intense bed life before we got married. I had several boyfriends and, before John, only one bed partner. He had no experience with girls when we met, and he was a virgin when we first made love. We were both so nervous. John was the most gentle, considerate person I've ever met. I knew he would never hurt me, either physically or emotionally. In bed, he only cared about making me happy, not about himself. There were no fireworks, but I loved him for taking care of me. What he may have lacked in the sexual act itself, he more than made up for with his mouth, fingers, and his love. It was a very, very pleasant experience. Unfortunately, over the years, as with many other couples I've read about, the frequency of our lovemaking has decreased and they've become routine and predictable. There was a funny incident at our wedding. The best man asked all the women in the room to stand up, whom John had invited on dates. All 3 bridesmaids, 4 of my cousins, my mother, and 2 of John's boyfriends stood up. When he asked all those who had actually been on a date with John to stay, only his friends remained. That's his point of view. I didn't have much competition. When he asked all the men who had met with me to stand up, 20 people stood up, including John's boss. John was getting a very experienced woman. Well, yes, of course. In fact, I regret that I didn't get more bed experience before John and I got married. I've often wondered what other men would be like. After I got married, I belonged exclusively to John, and I thought I'd never find out. The longer we've been married, the more I've thought about it. That is, until that week at the resort at the Sheraton Mirage Hotel, 10 years later. I am a communications teacher at the College of Technical and Continuing Education in Sydney, Australia, teaching business writing, public speaking, meeting procedures, etc. John is an apartment sales manager at a housing construction company. John's company was doing very well, and management decided to send 4 managers to the Sheraton Mirage Hotel on the Gold Coast for a week's vacation as a reward for the sales department working so well. One of the managers, Ray, was not initially invited, but when one of the chosen ones had to cancel the trip due to illness, Ray was invited instead. Ray was an aspiring manager, much younger than the others, who thought he was much better than he really was. John told me that Ray was not particularly respected at work, as he was more interested in his promotion and competition with others than working in a team, working to develop the company itself. In particular, he was one of John's competitors in the company, but he constantly failed to cope with the tasks and at first resented the fact that he was not rewarded with a trip to the resort. When we arrived at the resort, the company provided John and me with a very nice Mercedes sports car for rent. All the resort staff were young, very attractive and attentive, especially to John. And all our suites had a bar specially stocked with our favorite drinks. We had champagne for me, the best scotch for John, and the bar was replenished daily. All our towels were decorated with monograms with the initials of our names. The company and Sheraton have made every effort to provide us with a fantastic week. On the first night at the resort, we were greeted with a very elegant dinner and dancing. I wanted to look good and put on a black dress made of raw silk with an open back and black stockings. I am 5 feet 5 inches tall, brunette, and have a very feminine figure, 34C-28-34. My husband and others have told me that they think I am very beautiful. I can confirm this. Sue sent me her picture, and she is definitely a very beautiful lady. The cocktail dress showed off my assets, and John liked it when I wore it. He liked it when other men at parties were jealous that I was his wife. I've always enjoyed flirting harmlessly with men, and John likes to watch, knowing that they have no chance. I love making love, but since we got married, I haven't had anyone but John. But there are times when I wish he was more enthusiastic, more creative, more assertive, even a little aggressive in our lovemaking. At that time, I did not know that I would find all this at the resort, but not with John. The other 3 managers knew each other well and kept Ray and Rosalind, his wife, out of their social circle, so I went over to where they were sitting and struck up a conversation with them. I had never met Ray before, and from what John told me, I assumed he was a brash young man. In fact, I found that he and Rosalind were very nice people, and I really enjoyed talking to them. Ray was very good-looking, about 6 feet tall, quite fit, a few years younger than me, and a great conversationalist. Rosalind seemed quiet and shy, but extremely attractive. After a while, 2 other wives joined us. In Australia, it's customary for wives to be in one group and husbands in another, but Ray stayed with our group. Soon after, the music changed, and Ray asked me to dance. I found out that he was an exceptional dancer and knows his stuff on the dance floor. Soon everyone started dancing, and soon the dance floor became very crowded. John danced with other wives, clearly enjoying it a lot. Ray was a pretty charming man and a great conversationalist, as well as a dancer, but his touch. The way he touched my bare back so gently but purposefully, almost looking for something there, stroking, sliding, not roughly like a feather, sometimes sinking a little lower. He was whispering in my ear, his hand constantly moving and searching. His eyes maintained constant eye contact with mine, and I was almost hypnotized by him. The touching, the flattery, the whispering continued every time we danced together. He spoke softly, complimentfully, politely, and very tactfully. I quickly began to enjoy dancing with him. I dance well, and so does he. Ray hugged me to him and continued to touch my back with his fingertips, seemingly looking for some place on my back. At the same time, he continued to whisper in my ear so that I could feel his breath on my neck and earlobe. From time to time, Ray would gently but firmly hold me to him so that I could feel his body. When he did this, his hand slid down my back so that I couldn't move away, thereby establishing his control. Ray told me how much he liked my dress, how it fits my body perfectly, what a great figure I have, and how he liked that I was without a bra. Actually, I needed a bra. He also asked me unobtrusively about John, what he was like outside of work, how long we were married, how happy I was with him, what we did socially, etc. Despite myself, I answered his questions. Then Ray found what he was looking for, my weakness. I like being touched just above where my buttocks meet, and I gasped when Ray stroked me there, especially when his fingers slid between my back cheeks, searching for the top of my thong. From that moment on, I belonged to him, as long as he continued to caress my body with his exploring fingers. The questions became more and more personal, and I kept answering. About John, about me, even about our bed life. Ray was careful to hide us from the eyes of others on the crowded dance floor, but a couple of times he deliberately made John see us, and once he slipped his hand under my dress and teased my nipple. He kissed my neck, telling me to relax and enjoy myself. At the same time, I felt constant pressure on my stomach. I protested to no avail. Ray was enjoying himself and making sure that I was enjoying him too. I wanted more, and he knew it. Several times during the night, when Ray was with Rosalind, instead of dancing with me, I saw him watching me and whispering something in her ear, and each time she smiled and returned to dancing with my husband. It was obvious that something was going on between them, although I was too naive to understand it at the time. Eventually, the evening ended and we all went to our suites. By that time, I was already seduced and didn't even realize it. When John and I were in our room, I was quiet with him, not really wanting to reveal my feelings for Ray. John asked me if I liked Ray, but before I could answer him, he started talking about how beautiful Rosalind was. I really wanted to make love to John that night, but his talk about Rosalind ruined my mood. I'm worried that you might think of me as an easily accessible woman who would sleep with anyone. Nothing could be further from the truth. As I said earlier, I've never slept with anyone but John since we got married, and only once before that. I will say that I have certainly received some unambiguous hints over the years. But easily accessible? Not at all. I admit that I enjoy the process of seduction when I am seduced. It happened to me a couple of times outside of my marriage, but I could always enjoy it and leave. The week at the Sheraton was completely unusual in many ways, and it happened at a time when John was almost obsessed with his work, leaving little time for me. I'm sure it happens to a lot of couples. He had his own career and I had mine, so we were both busy. Every evening after the dance, John spent an hour or two working on emails and calling his head office. The next day, we all lounged around the pool for a few hours before the men left to play golf and the ladies went shopping. A brief comment on the pool. It's fantastic. A beautiful landscape overlooking the land. The water was wonderful, the perfect temperature and illuminated by underwater lanterns to give a soft glow. Very romantic. Ray and his obviously timid, quiet wife really made an impression in the pool. The slender woman, who was dressed fashionably but carefully the night before, was absolutely stunning in her bikini. Her figure was perfectly proportioned. The fact that she was much younger than the rest of US didn't hurt either. In the same way, Ray had the physique of a gymnast, not an extra gram anywhere, with broad shoulders and strong arms, very beautiful. The trunks outlined what I felt the night before, when it was pressing on my stomach. Promising. Our husbands tried not to stare, but we wives, of course, stared. And the rest of the wives caught the eye with our bikinis. Mine was red with lace straps and a clip at the back low enough to push my breasts together and show some cleavage. It was thin, unlined nylon, and of course it stuck when wet. Use your imagination. Imagine a wet t-shirt contest. But not as much as, maybe she's not such a sweet young thing, this Rosalind. My description of how they both looked is an understatement anyway. After what happened between Ray and me last night, I didn't particularly want to see him and Rosalind together, but it was inevitable. Ray kept his distance from me by the pool, happy to keep an eye on me, but Rosalind stayed close to John, and eventually they entered the pool and continued to talk there. My husband clearly liked the attention he was getting from a very beautiful, young woman. I went to the pool and sat on the step in it, so that the water was just below my boobs. Ray came over and sat on the edge behind me, putting his feet on either side of me. The conversation was harmless, but during the conversation he began to gently stroke my neck and ears. It was so nice. His fingers slid to the top of my breasts above the bikini, so I moved his hands back to my neck and shoulders and told him to behave properly. I was watching John and Rosalind. They were at the far end of the pool. She was facing him, her arms wrapped around his neck as support. I couldn't see John's hands underwater, and I wondered what he was doing with them there. At that moment, Ray gently put my head on his shoulder, and I turned to say something to that, and something significant. I was humiliated. I hurried out of the pool and back to my room, leaving the three of them in the pool. That night we went out to dinner again and then danced. I recovered from my embarrassment by the pool and Ray's insulting charm, and his seduction dance continued. Everyone danced with other people's spouses, but Ray always stayed with me for slow dances, and I noticed that Rosalind also danced them only with John. I thought it was a bit like a coincidence, but later found out it wasn't. With each dance, Ray acted a little more actively, stroking here, touching there, whispering. Rosalind did the same with John, nothing unusual, but she certainly wanted to let him know that she found him attractive and enjoyed his company. John later told me that she told him not to worry about Ray and me, that Ray was flirting with everyone, but he was actually completely harmless. Imagine a middle-aged man who is flattered by a pretty young brunette with a beautiful slender figure and friendly manners. He couldn't resist her, as I couldn't resist Rosalind's young, handsome husband. In a couple of days, I began to feel more comfortable with Ray. He didn't really try anything that I could disagree with. At best, I would feel quickly if he had the opportunity. He didn't even try to kiss me. During the week, the team became even closer. which, I am sure, was what the company was trying to achieve. Even Ray was getting more and more involved, which, of course, is what he wanted. On the third night, the relationship between Ray and me escalated. Everyone stayed at the resort, and John and I wanted to try something different, a bar with live music a few kilometers up the coast that we had heard about. Ray and Rosalind asked if they could join us. Rosalind and I both decided to dress up and wear something beautiful. It was a warm day and night, and no one else would have recognized us. John invited me to get behind the wheel of the Mercedes. The bar was good, and the band was excellent, pulsating music with a real rhythm. I was wearing a white silk blouse and a short red skirt, perfect for dancing, and my favorite perfume. Rosalind was wearing a blue blouse with a black skirt. We both made an effort to be glamorous with our makeup. Rosalind and I were a very effective couple. We danced with each other for hours, drank a lot. I was careful when driving home. Ray and I saw Rosalind kiss John, so he smiled and kissed me lightly on the lips too. He slowly led us away from them, away from their eyes, and the next kiss was more insistent, more demanding. I couldn't resist answering even if I wanted to. That's when I found out Ray was a sensual kisser. Fireworks. Our tongues intertwined with each other. Our hands pulled each other closer. My arms were wrapped around Ray's neck, and his hands were on my back, caressing with their gentle touches this erotic place right above my thong. I just couldn't get enough of that kiss or his hands. Dancing with Ray was so erotic. He kept me at the far end of the dance floor, where Rosalind and John couldn't see us, holding me close and occasionally lightly kissing me on the lips. But it was his gaze, the way he smiled and kept in contact with my eyes while continuing to explore my body on the dance floor, that drove me crazy with desire. He fascinated me, almost hypnotized me, tormented me with desire. On the way home, we decided to go to the local observation deck with a magnificent view of the ocean, where we could definitely take a little walk. I was driving, and Ray was sitting in front next to me. John and Rosalind were sitting in the back, her head resting on his shoulder. She was lightly nibbling his ear. My hands were holding the steering wheel, and Ray put his hands on my thigh just below my skirt and gradually climbed higher along the inside of my thigh, almost to my thong. I was already shaking with desire. I could barely drive, involuntarily spreading my knees a little. And again, somehow Ray knew exactly when to stop, leaving me disappointed. John was sitting in the back seat, occupied by Rosalind, and didn't notice anything as Ray was practically making love to me in front. I missed the turn to the observation deck and drove straight to the hotel, but not before I looked in the mirror and saw Rosalind put John's hand under her blouse and pull it up to her chest, and I realized that she wasn't wearing a bra. She desperately wanted to make love to John, but he immediately went back to work, leaving me so upset. I know John is passionate about his work, but I didn't understand how he could work after the night we just spent with a young couple. There was nothing I could do except take a very cold shower. Even after the shower, I was overcome with lust and disappointed when John worked at his computer for several hours. I finally fell asleep before he went to bed. The next morning, after breakfast, John and I went to the sauna. We were alone there, so we took off our swimsuits and swim trunks and wrapped towels around our waists. We talked for a while. Rosalind reached out to Ray, casually covered his groin with her hand over the towel, and began stroking. He kissed her and slid his hand under the towel on her hip. She suddenly leaned forward, and we all realized what Ray was doing to her. John and I were just watching. When they dropped the towels, they both continued to stroke each other. I kissed John and whispered, "Don't worry, wait until we get back to our room." And she dropped her own towel from her waist. Rosalind said to Ray, "Aren't you lucky?" Ray, who was looking between my legs, said, "I think John does too. I like it trimmed." Rosalind and Ray came over to our side of the spa, sat on either side of us and started massaging our necks. I was melting under Ray's touch, and John was melting under Rosalind's touch, too. Just when I was about to let Ray do whatever he wanted with me, Rosalind put her hand over John's crotch under the towel and said, "Oh, my God." At the same moment, John grabbed my hand and we left the spa. When John and I returned to our room, we rushed into the shower to wash each other. It was so good. After that, John and I took a long walk along the beautiful beach of Burley Hills. That night, John admitted that he was intimidated by Ray's obviously well-endowed body compared to his own. If I had to guess the difference, then if John was 5 inches, then Ray was about 9 inches and much thicker. John lavished praise on my figure, saying that my breasts were much prettier and bigger than Rosalind's, and he could certainly understand why Ray was staring at me. He asked me if I had ever had such a gifted lover. I said no. And had I thought about it? I teased him and said, just this morning. In fact, I definitely thought about it before and wondered what it would be like. On our penultimate day at the Sheraton, John went off to play golf with the others for the day, and I assumed Ray had gone too. Rosalind went shopping with the other wives, so I went and lay down by the pool, enjoying my solitude, and soon fell asleep. I woke up to find Ray sitting next to me, leaning over and rubbing suntan oil into my back and shoulders. My bikini top was unbuttoned. Ray rubbed the oil in, always returning to the spot right above my buttocks, knowing the effect it had on me. His hands went all over my legs, massaging my feet, each toe, then up the outside to the bikini and down the inside of each leg. I tried to tell him to stop, but his hands on me were so nice that I couldn't say a word. I put my bikini back in place and rolled over to stop him, but he just continued to rub oil into my hands, then moved to my chest, staying just above the bikini cups, then rubbed my stomach to the bottom of the bikini, trying to lower it a little. Ray, please stop. I don't want people to see me more than my body. Ray replied, I've seen it all before, and so have you. Did John say anything last night? I noticed that he still hadn't taken off the towel. Why didn't he do it? Does he have less? Yes, quite a bit. And yes, he was embarrassed by it. Then Ray took my hand in his, looked into my eyes and asked, Sue, will you come upstairs with me? I know I shouldn't have done it, but I did. I was almost in a daze when Ray led me to the elevator, barely able to walk from excitement. I knew what was going to happen, but I didn't know how. My doubts of the previous days came flooding back. Would Ray like me? Will he find me attractive? Would he compare me to Rosalind? Will he like me? What would he be like? What does he want me to do? Will he hurt me? What will this do to my marriage? I was scared. I was excited. I was more nervous than ever. I've never done anything like this before. No matter what, and knowing that I should turn around and leave, I kept walking next to Ray. I knew I really wanted it. The first thing I noticed in Ray's room was Rosalind's underwear on the bed, and I remember thinking how much smaller her bra was than mine. Ray picked it up to move it, smiled, almost reading my mind, and said to me, yes. He put his arm around my shoulders and bent down to kiss me on the lips. It was a slow but demanding kiss, seeking penetration. I trembled when his lips touched my neck and shoulders. The straps of my bikini slipped off, the latch opened. I still remember the sound of my bikini unbuttoning, the sound of my surrender to Ray. Then he pulled my bikini panties down to my ankles. We resumed kissing, but with more urgency on both sides. The fireworks I felt from his kiss at the dance were 10 times stronger when I was naked in his arms. My whole body was on fire. I could feel his lips on my lips. I did as he told me. We clawed at each other, desperately trying to merge as he went in and out of me. After that, he bent me over the chaise longue and spread my legs apart. He had some lube, and he entered my ass, gently at first, but then demanding, pushing in and out. It was the first time for me, and it wasn't something I wanted to repeat. After that, Ray carried me to the bed. I was exhausted and thought that I had nothing more to give him, and that he had nothing left for me, since he had already poured into me twice. I was wrong. He and I did things to each other that John and I would never have been able to do. My biggest shock was when I saw Rosalind sitting, looking at us and smiling. She was in a bikini and said, "Don't worry about John, he's fine." I'm speechless. I almost died when I saw her in the room, and when she undressed and lay down on the bed, I was almost in shock. We collapsed on the bed, Ray on top of me. After that, I slept for a few hours and took a shower. Somehow I got back to our room. My legs hurt, my back hurt, my mouth hurt. I was asleep when John came back from his golf game, and we couldn't talk until later. One of the fears I experienced after my brain started functioning normally again was related to pregnancy. I know I was 35 years old and the chances of getting pregnant were slim, but it scared me. The next morning, I asked John to take me to the pharmacy, and I bought a pill the next morning. John knew about it, but he never questioned me about anything. We saw Rosalind and Ray later that day, but nothing happened. Ray and I danced together a few times that night. One day Ray whispered to me, "Are you enjoying yesterday?" Yes. You're so cool, Sue. We need to do it again, and as soon as possible." Then he added, "Oh, do you know that some of your photos were taken?" I wanted to knee him in the groin, but instead I smiled at him and dug my nails into the back of his hand, drawing blood. About 2 weeks after we returned home, John and I finally talked about this week at the resort. At first, he did not want to say what he had with Rosalind and denied that they had made love. After John confessed that he was with Rosalind, I took a deep breath, gathered my courage, and told him what happened to Ray and that I would not see him again, which was not entirely true. We both cried, hugged, expressed our love for each other, and finally fell asleep. I didn't tell him that Rosalind had joined Ray and me at some stage, and I wasn't going to do that. But before he reads it, I'll have to tell him, not let him read about it. Am I ashamed of this experience? Yes. Did I encourage Ray? No. Could I resist him? No. Did I like what happened? Yes, but not all of them. Did he seduce me? Absolutely. Was he, and is he, a good lover? Amazing. Am I still with John? Yes. Ray wanted to take over, control, tease until I begged for the end, and then he teased again, despite all the objections. And yet I loved it and wanted, and still want, more. Why? Because it was so different from the sedate, mundane, predictable domestic lovemaking. A 35-year-old faithful wife was seduced and began to desire more. Was I ashamed? Yes. My reaction? Could this happen to me again? I hope not, but am I sure about it? No. Rosalind later told me that some other wives also succumbed to Ray's flirting in the sauna, but I was the only one he decided to take as a lover. Why? Because of his competition with John. He wanted to be better than John, to take away from him something that was close and dear to him, me. Ray actually confessed this to me some time later. He discovered that he actually liked me very much, and despite everything, he enjoyed making love to me that day much more than he ever expected. He felt guilty for what he had done and wanted to clear his conscience so that he could start with a clean slate. Ray told me that Rosalind was involved with him in this plan, that her role was to distract John while he seduced me into his bed. Fortunately for all of us, she really liked John and couldn't follow through with their original plan, which was for John to discover that Ray and I were making love. Since then, I've often teased John that I might get another lover. Nothing proves effectiveness like a little competition. The next evening after Robert agreed to write this story and I started emailing him the files, I started teasing John about it, about what I was telling Robert. After a couple of days of sending emails to Robert and my constant teasing, John couldn't take it anymore. He responded to it in bed, enthusiastically, and I liked it. I think he probably knows that I'm not just teasing him by saying I'm going to take a lover. And John and Rosalind? I have my suspicions about them,